everybody? It's your boy Pitts, Pitt Sports Zone, Bowie TV, coming to you live. Listen, it's going down, all things HBCUs. And who else better to start it off with them Bowie State Bulldogs? We coming to you, Bowie State Bulldogs, total access. We got the Morgan State Bears. Listen, all HBCUs information, all HBCU news, sporting events, updates. You get it live here with Pitt Sports Zone, Bowie TV, Comcast Channel 77. Verizon Channel 11 is going down. Don't you miss a beat.
Listen, it's only the beginning because it's early still.
And
we're going to be here all day.
All day.
What's going on, everybody? Y'all know what it is. It's your boy Pitts and Push Sports Talk Radio, Pitt Sports Zone, Bowie TV, coming to you live yet again. You already know what it is. It's HBCU everything. But today we have a special guest. We have Steve Wyche, NFL Network analyst. Steve, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, since you're talking HBCUs, you can't forget I'm a Howard University graduate. You got that Bowie State, Morgan State. Come on down the highway a little bit to D.C.
We're going to get there. We're just going to get there in your intro. Before we go any further, I'd like to give a shout out to my sponsors, Staples and Smart Water. Thank you for all that you do for Pitt Sports Zone, Pitt and Push Sports Talk Radio. For your print needs, shop Staples. For your water, you know what? Drink smart. It's the only way to go. Steve, before I do this, no, you know what? I'm going to do the introduction first. Let me give a little bit about yourself that I know. And then if you can't, give a little bit more to our viewers and listeners that they may not know. And then we'll jump right into it. But again, Steve is no stranger to football. Steve is a previous player himself. Steve played everything, basically offensive, quarterback, running back, outside linebacker through high school. He then went on to play at the University of Missouri, where he layered, as he just shouted out, them HU Bisons. He just gave props. He's a HBCU alum. So over 30 years of reporting. Steve, thank you very much for joining us.
No, I appreciate you, Terrence, and you, Sydney, having me on. It's great. When I transferred to Howard from Missouri, I didn't play football anymore. And it's funny because Howard still has its transfer rules pretty much in place as they did back in the 80s, where I would have had to sit out a year after being redshirted and not playing for a year at Missouri. So as they say in football vernacular, I lost my stinger. So I put all my efforts into getting that journalism degree at HU, and I am not upset that I decided to make that turn.
Look at where you are now.
Right.
It all seems to work out for you.
And when you talk about HBCUs, because of course that is the highlight of our conversation today. But before we jump into HBCU athletics, I did want to jump into a couple things and give you some flowers along the way, right? Because along the trajectory, I said over 30 years reporting, you have been the one to break some of the most monumental storylines in sports history, whether it was Michael Jordan becoming a part owner with the Wizards, or if it was the Michael Vick dog ring situation, and, more importantly, the Colin Kaepernick kneeling during the national anthem. If you can, when you look back in hindsight and you just look at it, and those are just pieces to the puzzle of the career that you created. Can you just give us insight on those monumental moments? And, when you've come across it, did you know this story is going to break?
Yeah, I think they were all different. Those three stories you mentioned, with MJ, I covered the NBA for 7 years, a couple years down in Miami when I was at the Miami Herald, and then at the Washington Post. And with MJ, it was more working relationships with people in the NBA, but more so being in DC, right? DC is this political grapevine, right? This legal grapevine where you got lawyers talking, politicians talking, and they all intertwine with athletics in some way, shape, or form. So I'm just getting these phone calls, this and that, like, hey, MJ's coming to work for the Wizards in some capacity. Like, what? No way. Why would he come here? He's got no tie to DC. Yeah, but, David Stern, who was the NBA commissioner at the time, was trying to get MJ in the ownership, and Abe Pollin. So all of this stuff started to come together. And DC is such a competitive media market. I was like, okay, I got to get this out here, but I got to make sure it's right. Because if I get Michael Jordan's story wrong, I'm going to look really bad. And this was at the advent of the internet. This is right when print media was going on to the internet in like 01, 02. And so, I got everything for us to go to print. I remember when it went to print, I'm actually covering a game in Indianapolis, Indiana. It was a Wizards-Pacers game. And I hear some of my competition on the phone with their editors like, hey, Washington Post is reporting that Michael Jordan's coming to work for the Wizards. And they were like, oh, no, that's just a rumor. And they're like, no, it's splashed all over the front page on their internet website. And so, the guys are kind of looking at me, from the competition like, is this true? I was like, yeah. I know it's going to be a rough couple of days for you, but I got it. In terms of the Michael Vick thing, I was covering the Falcons for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. As you hear, I was a journalist for more than 2 decades before I got into TV. And that was just a slow steamroll. It's probably the most aggressive and intense reporting I had to do because I'm in Atlanta. This whole thing was happening up in Virginia, but it happened to be from the part of Virginia where my paternal family was from. So I was familiar with the layout, of the ground. My father's from Hampton, Mike's from Newport News. So I was able to kind of finesse some relationships through familial ways. And then the Howard U card, the local prosecutor in Surrey County, Virginia, went to Howard Law School, so I had to play that card. So a lot of things really worked, but it was probably the most difficult thing I've ever had to do because I had a great relationship with Michael Vick. Yeah. People in the media that he trusted. Yeah. Here I am having to report on some just absolutely awful stuff about him. And, it took 6-7 months in the process of doing that. It just tore the city of Atlanta apart. It was really bad. But he's great now. I'm so happy for the turn he's made in his life. I love Mike. We've got a great relationship. I'm pulling for him to succeed down in Norfolk. It'd be great. And then, the Kaepernick one was just me being in the right place at the right time. And having the life experience and the journalistic experience to pull it off the right way. Because remember, that happened in 2016, right? That's when Barack was leaving office and Hillary and Trump were their party's nominees. And all summer long, we had all these recorded shootings of unarmed black men. So you had all of this as kind of the backdrop of the societal environment as to where when this happened, when I saw this and I spoke to Cap about this, I was able to contextualize the story, what I felt was the most important way. And it wasn't what he did, but why he did it. Yeah. And 98% of the reaction was what he did. Yes. Overlooking why he did it. Absolutely. Which is why I think it's still such an ominous story, in today's history.
Absolutely. Sydney, did you because I'll add to something you said, Steve, give Sydney a chance to come in if she has anything that she want to add or take away from that.
I mean, the last thing you just said was just really stuck out to me as a, aspiring journalist in the field, why he did it. 98% was what he did, and the rest was not why he did it. And so I just want a little bit of advice as to where, like, when you are reporting on these things and when you're speaking to these athletes that are making monumental moves in advocacy, do you really dig deep into their reasoning why? And then how do you approach that?
Great question. Look, with Terrence, you started this out. You like tell people something they don't know about you. I'm a big true crime addict, right? I listen to true crime podcasts. I'm nuts about it. And one thing when you watch these legal shows and whatnot, what are they always talking about? Motive, right? Yeah. What was the motive for them committing a crime or not committing a crime or whatever? So a lot of times the motive is the important hook, or that is the important thing more so than the action or reaction. But you heard me also when I was explaining, said that I've lived enough life, right? I knew had Kaepernick done this just in kind of any ordinary time, it would have been like, okay, he's protesting the flag. Well, what's he upset about? He's making all these millions, blah, blah, blah. But because of the political backdrop and because of all of the shootings, I just felt the why.
Yeah.
The why was so important. You know, when we hear about a lot of these, you know, the church shootings in South Carolina, why did that man go in there and shoot those people? Like a lot of times that's the important thing that we never get answers to.
Absolutely.
Right. And here I spoke to the person who gave me the answer. This is why I'm risking my career.
Yeah.
And so I just felt that was so important because this is a guy, people forget Colin Kaepernick was probably one of the top 5 most recognizable athletes in all of pro sports in the United States back in 2013. And, you know, when he's kissing the arm like this, when he's scoring, he was on the cover of Esquire. He was on the GQ.
Yeah.
Right. So people forget that part about it. This dude was on the mountaintop.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, shortly before he took this stance. So that's what added to this, on top of the fact that if had this been somebody who was on the kickoff return team, it wouldn't have made this type of ripple. But he was one of 32 quarterbacks in the NFL, and we know quarterbacks rarely take a stance on anything. So there was just a whole lot of me being in the game for a long time too, where I recognized if I put this in the right context, it should have the proper impact. Even though, again, 98% of the reaction was what he did and not why he did it.
And I'm glad you said that, right? Because even when we try to contextualize in today's world, for some reason, you know, I think a lot of readers pick and choose the pieces that they want to apply pressure to. And you spoke something that you said, you know, the what is what a lot of people focused on, and not enough people paid attention to the why. And I read in an article that you did with the Rhiannon Walker in 2017, and you said, I believe Colin was starting to find his voice. I love how you reported. I love how you reported that, because a lot of people took his voice out of it, right? And they only looked at the action, but not. And something like, for those of us who have children, you know, when you're talking to your child, right? You know, there's always a reaction to an action. And in hindsight, someone does something for a particular reason. We may not understand it all the time, or we may not always agree with it, but there's always that middle piece, what we call common denominators, as to, okay, why am I doing this? And a lot of the times the what overshadows the why. And in Colin's situation, sadly, the what was more important than the why, in my opinion.
Well, in terms of the reaction to it. Now, his action was significant, right? People forget he sat down for 2 games before he took a knee, or sat down for a game before he took a knee. That's when I saw him. He was seated. And the action was significant. You know, people feel, you know, it's tradition more than anything to stand for the national anthem. But when I was talking about he was finding his voice, think about this. And Sydney, you're not there yet. I'm assuming you're in your early 20s. Cap was like 27 years old when he did this. When I'm 27, when most of us are 27, we are so fearful of making a misstep because of what it can do for our career, right? But pro athletes, their biggest money earning years are probably from 24 to 30, right? When they retire at 32 and 33, their earning potential is coming down while most folks are going up. It's changing a little bit now. But there's something that always in life causes most of us to find our voices or to find our purpose, right? Be it having children, being it losing a loved one, being it a societal plague, like what was happening with these unarmed black men getting shot. There's something that gets us. You know, we overcome that fear. We do leap out of the plane hoping that the ripcord works and the parachute comes out. There's always something. And for him, that was it. And I'm sitting here as somebody who was almost twice his age, like, wow, like he's a lot braver than I would have ever been at that age, and probably than I would have been at the age when I was reporting the story. So, salute to him and to people who find their voices, their purpose at a moment where they can make such significant change.
Absolutely. And lastly, I just want to get your take on something. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. So, of course, everything is black and yellow for me.
I see the background. I see the background on your graphics, of course.
If you can, just real quick, breaking news today.
Yeah.
Jalen Ramsey traded for Minka, for Jonah Smith, Jalen Ramsey to the Steelers, Minka to the Dolphins in a 2027 draft pick.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's a huge deal. I mean, more than anything, it goes to show you how much Pittsburgh is going all in, right? And we've seen a lot of teams gather all veteran star power, and they can think in 1 year we can make it happen. Usually, we know an assemblage of talent does not a team make, right? There's a difference between having a lot of talent and having a good team. I think this one has all of our interest peaked because it's Mike Tomlin, right? Pittsburgh is the one organization, the NFL, where the club, where the history, and where the head coach are bigger than any player on that roster.
Absolutely.
Right? And so, like, Jalen Ramsey is a great player. Jonnu Smith is a hell of a player. He is going to fit. He played in Tennessee for the offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith, who's now the offensive coordinator in Pittsburgh.
Right.
Aaron Rodgers is still the linchpin to all of this. Can he stay healthy? Can he? But again, Mike Tomlin and that Steelers aura will overshadow him, much like the Packers aura overshadowed him. The Jets don't have that type of history or that type of environment like the Steelers. So we'll see. In terms of the Dolphins, you knew it was irreparable between Jalen and the organization. They were going to move him. I did not expect him to end up in Pittsburgh. So Minka coming back to Miami, it's good for the Dolphins because Minka Fitzpatrick's a hell of a player. The Dolphins also need to get a cornerback. And what's intriguing to this, Darren, since you're a Steeler fan, I think Jalen's going to end up playing safety there. I've had conversations with him where he knew later in his career he was going to transition to safety. And the player who he models his game most after, who he has got the utmost regard for, is Charles Woodson, who, as we know, started his career as a corner, went to Green Bay as a safety, had this rebirth, and now he's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So it'll be interesting to see how these chess pieces work out. But I think in terms of the short term, Pittsburgh comes out ahead. But are they still within striking distance of Baltimore or Kansas City or the Bills? Denver's going to be really good this year. I mean, the Chargers could be really – so have they made up significant ground? And if so, is it enough to do it all in 1 year? Because this is a one-year shot.
Absolutely. Well,
but I'm not mad at him. I'm not mad.
Well, Ron and Titus was right in our group chat. That's exactly what they were saying. The topic at hand, HBCU Athletics. HBCUs is important to me for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. When I was growing up, we weren't taught HBCUs. I was taught Pitt, Penn State, Robert Morris, Duquesne, etc. And, moving to Maryland, it opened and it broadened my horizon, right? Because I was introduced to Bowie State first, then learning what HBCUs are. And as I grow up, as I get older, should I say, it still, for me, is a misconception about what an HBCU is, what they stand for, what the culture is. And a lot of the times for me, I feel it comes from individuals who either never attended an HBCU or they heard it from someone else. So for you being an HBCU alum at the Howard University, can you just talk about what that experience was for you and what the culture meant to you as a student?
It means everything. I mean, and look, all of us will say, Sydney, you're going to say this when you graduate from Bowie. My HBCU made me an adult, right? Howard made me a man. Terrence, I'm sure you're like, Bowie made me a man. Sydney, you're going to be like, Bowie made me a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the thing is, I've got a basis of comparison, right?
Yeah.
I went to University of Missouri for 2 years, the big state school that everybody grows up wanting to go to. I grew up outside of St. Louis in the suburbs, no black kids, other than a few black kids in my school, in my town. But I wasn't recruited football-wise by one HBCU. I didn't get a letter from ground. And my parents went to Hampton Institute.
Oh.
Significant clarification. But my mom was always like, well, how come you don't want to go to Grambling or Southern? I don't know if they want me. I haven't heard from them because, they didn't have recruiting budgets and whatnot. And again, when I came out, it was before Instagram and whatnot. So they were actually mailing letters and making phone calls to your home phone with a 20-foot cord hanging off the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so having gone to University of Missouri where I always wanted to go, great journalism school, everything, getting there and feeling far more isolated than I did even in my high school. Because my high school, I grew up with everybody. There I was put into a place with a lot of strangers, going to classrooms with 280 students, in the classroom. Basically, my friend circle were my teammates. And so at the beginning of my second season there, we had a coaching change in the offseason. Beginning of my second season, I realized I was not because I wasn't a starter. I wasn't one of the new regime's guys. So they were going to be bringing in guys over me, their own guys. Understood it. They were very upfront about it. So when I decided to transfer, an old high school teammate, one of the few black kids in the town, was like, we should go to an HBCU. We've never experienced that. So I was like, great. So I applied to Hampton and I applied to Howard. The coach at Howard was Willie Jeffries, who had recruited me when he was at Wichita State University. Come on. But I would have had to sit out a year. Like I didn't have spring ball. I didn't have all of this stuff. So in those 6 or 7 months between even reporting date, I lost about 15 pounds. Used to weigh not that much. I used to weigh about 230, 235. But I was still stacked a lot differently than I am right now.
Yeah.
But I was like, you know what? I lost my stinger, as they say. And so I get to Howard. This was in the mid 80s, right? So what was DC in the mid 80s? Murder capital of the world, murder capital of the United States, I should say. Crack was in full bloom.
Rayful Edmond days.
Correct. This is right after I went to Howard, 1986, right after the Len Bias death. So it was when DC was just crazy. We couldn't even go to parties at University of Maryland campus. They were not letting people in because of that. So here's this kid from the suburbs. Only crime I've been around is people making too much noise late night at parties, right? I'm on Rhode Island in North Capitol, gunshots. So I grew up like this, right? Was very aware. And then I get to Howard, and the students were far more competitive, right? I graduated with Stan Verrett, who's the lead sports center, anchor on Sports Center. Michelle Miller, who's on CBS Good Mornings. Frederica Whitfield, who's on CNN. She was right above me, right? Gus Johnson, who's the Fox. He's like a year or two behind me. We were all together. And so like this inner competitiveness with all of us, we all saw richness in each other. I was like, wow, I've never been around this type of support yet, this much type of internal competition as well. And the teachers pushed. I'd never been challenged like that, where they were really invested. So going through that, making some of the best friends, being in DC at that time. I mean, it was politically, Reagan was the president. Marion Barry was the mayor. I mean, every day was something intense going on. And so it really set me on the path as to where, I had a part-time job at the Washington Post. I'm sitting in newsrooms with Michael Wilbon and David Aldridge and Tony Kornheiser. So by the time I graduated, I was more than ready. Yeah. The only thing I wasn't ready for was taking my first job in Richmond, Virginia, and being in a newsroom where, people are adopting kids or going through divorces, like real life shit. Excuse my language, real life stuff that I've yet to experience. But otherwise, Howard I was ready. There was no, a lot of people, like you said, who don't go to HBCUs. Well, if you go to HBCUs, you only experience that Black life, and the world isn't like that. Look, we one thing about Black people in this country, we found a way to adjust.
and still are. And still are.
And the other thing is, a lot of people think that people go to HBCUs are homogenous, right? We all come from the hood, or we all come from a Black area. Like I said, I came from 35, 40 miles outside of St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
I was the last line of civilization. There was corn silos and beef pastures within a mile of my house. So, beef pastures, cattle ranches. But we're all like, people assume so much about us because they don't want to take the time to learn about us. Mm-hmm. And that's what HBCUs do. Like I never read Black authors, right? I never knew there were separate psychological and scientific studies that were administered to Black people just to make us seem inferior, right? I never learned that. And so I go to Howard and I'm like, I'm as well-rounded as I can be. So that's why I pound that drum and HBCU drums. My only thing is when I say HBCU grads, we talk about what they did for us. We have to do for ourselves and others.
Yeah.
Right. If we get job interviews and we get hired and we go in there and we're terrible or we behave badly, people don't look at us as individuals. It reflects on our university. Absolutely. I mean, to be honest, to be real, in Richmond, Virginia, where Virginia Union's located, I had one of my bosses tell me, we've had a couple interns from Virginia Union. They weren't ready, so we'll never go back there again. Like that. Like, these people, we can say we messed it up for everybody else, but that's how we're viewed.
Wow. So
we really have to be caretakers of our institutions, of our legacies, whose we are. It's not just a name. It's not just a name on the back of our jerseys. It is our legacy at our institutions.
Yeah, the error for margin is very short when it
very
comes
small.
to the opportunities for HBCUs, and no starting beefs of who's the real HU.
As you can see by that look, he already knows.
Yeah. I already explained to you, my parents were graduates of Hampton Institute.
Sydney, did you have anything that you want to do?
I actually did. I can relate to you. I transferred from a PWI to Bowie State University, and when I got on campus, it was a big culture shock. Mm-hmm. I mean, as soon as I got on campus, it was just so much, it was a culture that I wasn't used to. And I did come from a predominantly Black town, but still going from a PWI to HBCU, it's much different from what I was expecting. So did you have that moment? It was just like, oh my goodness, where am I, when you first transferred?
Well, it might have been the first time first thing was probably when I heard gunshots about 100 feet from where I lived. Like, what? Where am I? But no, I mean, the main thing was like a couple days before classes started, they have like, I think it was called the big picnic or something. But to show up on the yard and there's just like thousands of students, white, Asian, European, Black of every shade. And it was the most welcoming, inviting, like, okay, where are you from? Do you know this person? So it was like it didn't feel like the first day at a new school. Mm-hmm. It felt like kind of the first day at a club where everyone is trying to welcome you in to find out about you, and they actually cared a little bit about you, your history. Are you the type of person I want to be with? I mean, out of the gate, I felt at home, even though I was in this completely unfamiliar environment, and it took. That's when I was like, okay, this is where I belong. Would it be that way if I went to another school? Would it if I went to Shaw, if I went to Prairie View? I don't know. Because remember, I was 20, 21 years old when I came into, so I was older than a lot of students. But it just felt right. And, it wasn't a matter of, okay, I got to get through this to see if I like it. I was like, I am going to get through this because I want to be a part of this.
Absolutely. HBCU Athletics. It's important to me. We lack media exposure. Right. I love what HBCU Go is doing.
Yes.
And the grill and everything that they're providing, the platform,
Yep.
being able to get the exposure, that we deserve and need, right? To be able to go out like Dion did, and not everyone is a Dion, but to be able to go out and recruit the top recruits and be able to lure them to their university, institution, and campus life, is it all comes from exposure, right? Two things: media exposure and finances. The HBCUs don't receive the same amount of money that other bigger schools or donors may do. A lot of the finances from HBCUs come from alumni givings. When it comes to HBCU athletics, and you being covering specifically HBCU Legacy Bowl, can you take us through? I watched this year before I came to New Orleans. I watched you, Bucky Brooks, and I apologize. I don't remember the other gentleman's name.
Charles Davis.
No, not Charles. Charles was on the field at that time. It was you, Bucky, and another guy, and you was talking about how when we go to a HBCU, we're taught to come prepared in advance because you were dressed because you had on your blazer and your slacks, and Bucky sat in the middle. And I like when you said, we're taught to come prepared, right? And you talk about that moment, and you talk about the progression from the 4 years that the HBCU Legacy Bowl has been in existence, and you talk about how you can see the difference in the way that the players are approaching it. And just this year specifically, just talk about the monumental moment that HBCU Legacy Bowl plays for the student athletes, and some things that you would like to see it expand to.
Well, first off, media-wise, it's broadcast on the NFL Network, just like we kick off the season with the now they're calling it the Clash at the Classic. Right, but the HBCU Classic at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, which now pits the champions of the SIAC and the CIAA. So this should be Miles College and Virginia Union. But with the Legacy Bowl, at first there's a lot of proving, right? Can the organizers establish a game that's legit? Because you remember a lot of folks are like, well, I don't know if I'm going to send my players there. Some coaches because we don't know if this is a lot of people try to do some things. So next thing you know, you show up to an HBCU combine. That kicks off the week where they take about 35 or 40 of probably the most likely draft eligible, the top priority free agent guys, and you let them run the floor. Every team is there. Every team is represented. I mean, Omar Khan from the Steelers was there. Mickey Loomis from the Saints. So, but all 32 teams are deeply represented as they're doing their pro day tour. So a lot of these guys who they didn't know about, all of a sudden they're like, okay, let's go back and check the film. Prime example, if you can fast forward to last year, Joaquin Davis, wide receiver, North Carolina Central, 6'4", 195, gets out there and pops a 4.4. At that size, everybody was like, okay, let's see if he does it again. Pops it again. Has a great week of practice. Doesn't get drafted, but within an hour of the draft, he's signing with the Denver Broncos. He's had a pretty good offseason. So, and they went back and watched the film. So that's what it does. But initially, it was proving that you could stage a game in a city right after Mardi Gras, 2 or 3 weeks after the Super Bowl. And they, the organizers who do this, it's incredible. These players get $30,000, $40,000 worth of gear. They get treated like kings every night. Yeah, I mean, they're eating out of Dookie Chase's one night. They're doing something the next night. It's top notch as it gets. So then Allstate gets on board, and everyone gets on board. And they have this job fair that goes with it. Now they've got the money where they send buses like those big comfort buses to 16 universities within a 6-hour drive of New Orleans. So next thing you know, you come here and there's more than 100 employers and shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, no joke. I mean, I'm not overstating this. There are probably more than 100 kids you could offer full-time jobs that day at the job fair.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
It's amazing. I mean, whether it be from Allstate, the Chicago Bears have hired people, the Seattle Seahawks have hired people from there. Law enforcement agencies hired people from there. I mean, so it's an incredible experience. So now the big thing, this year now teams are like, okay, guys, you got to go. You got to go. And so now I think it's kind of next level because typically we'll have about 15 guys who participate in that week go show up, get free agent sign. And a lot of guys have caught on. Ian Wheeler out of Howard last year caught on with the Bears, got hurt. But, I mean, there's been several. Brandon Codrington, the top kick returner for the Bills. So there's a lot of guys who make it. So exposure is significant. The big test now for HBCUs and basically anybody who is not a Power 5 school is NIL. And it's not necessarily the ability of HBCUs or these lower conference schools to raise the money. It's keeping your guys. I mean, we saw, I keep blanking on the young man's name, wide receiver from Prairie View, who's a star, right? I did a game, HBCU Go game with him. It was his last game because right after that game, Oklahoma signs him, right? Probably paid him several $100,000. And some of these HBCUs can pay that money to one or two guys. These guys are paying it to 80. Yeah. And so now the recruiting is very different. It's you come here, we'll get you to University of Georgia, or we want you to stay here. Our campus is great. We've got all these great history, but if not, we can get you University of Washington. You come in, you do the right thing, we'll get you the exposure you need. We've got these types of connections. So it's very, very difficult now for HBCUs, and they've got to pivot and understand, because what's going on at HBCUs is the same thing that's going on at Coastal Carolina or Florida International, right? They're dealing with the same thing when it comes to athletics and keeping their top tier talent.
Absolutely. And I know we've ran past our time, and I would love to do a part 2 with you, just to talk more.
Let's do it. I'm here for you, man.
One thing I love too, Jada Beyer, awesome running back. I mean, historical stats season last year, 27. I think he's ranked second
in all Division II.
And all Division II, and he's second in HBCU football in rushing yards, 2,700, 26 touchdowns. And then, of course, you know, one of my other guys from Morgan State, Elijah Williams,
stud,
went undrafted, and he's signed with the Minnesota Vikings.
Yep.
So, you know, the whole goal is to say, listen, we got some dogs in the HBCU level as well. You know, don't look at the school size. Don't look at whether it's HBCU, whether it's the MEAC, SWAC, SEAC, or CIAA. You know, look at them, you know, as players, because we got some ball players over here as well.
Yeah, and Elijah, he's a great story because teams came after him. Like the bigger universities came after him, but he's like, look, I'm a year away from getting my degree. Morgan State stuck with me when I had some eligibility issues coming out of high school. They groomed me into the person and the player that I am. So why would I do that? Now that takes a high character person, right? So if I'm an NFL team, I'm like, I want that guy. Yeah. He is a high character person to do that. You know, in terms of Jada, he was great. You know, he's just one. He plays a position where there's a tremendous running back. Yeah. There's just studs all over. He didn't run well,
right?
Which is a shame because when you watch him on film, nobody catches him. But he did end up getting some work with the Memphis Showboats.
Yep, UFL.
So you know, look, you never know what break a guy can get. I mean, you look at Kaderil Hodge, who's been in the NFL for 8 years with the Falcons, has a great walk-off touchdown catch last year, came out of Prairie View. You know, so every year there's guys who make it. But, you know, the one thing we have to do in the media is stop talking about what HBCUs don't have, right? They don't have the bomb weight room and this and that. Well, no, we don't have the bomb weight room, but last I checked, the 45-pound plate weighs the same in every weight room.
Absolutely.
So the guys in there better work freaking harder.
Yeah.
Don't show up at the Legacy Bowl fat. Because if you look at an NFL roster, there are no fat guys. There aren't any, no matter what position you play.
Yes, sir.
Right? When you show up to run a 40, you run it. Yeah. You don't sit there and say this or that. You participate. Don't do anything. Don't give yourself excuses that the media and everything wants you to buy into.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I thank y'all. Sydney, if you have any last words before I close out.
No, all is said. Thank you so much, Steve, for joining us today. I really was inspired.
Well, Sydney, all the best to you. I hope to be seeing you maybe in my chair one day. And
Hey,
Terrence, thank you so much
yeah.
for uplifting, man. This is important. And thanks for having me on. And anytime you need me, I'm here for you, brother.
Absolutely. Y'all know what it is. It's your boy Pitts and Push Sports Talk Radio, Pitt Sports Zone, Bowie TV, coming to you live. Once again, listen, HBCU Athletics, all HBCUs is going down. Where else to find it at but here? Enjoy the rest of your Monday.